Over the last couple of days, I've done videos on the interview that Masahiro Hikokubo, the duel writer for Yu-Gi-Oh! GX and all of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Animes, gave in V-Jump. And in this video, we are going to go over the final two excerpts that we are getting from that interview at this time. Hopefully we will be getting more interviews with Hikokubo, as these interviews have given us the answer to the Fire Dragon mystery, revealed the original Ace of Blair, and the origins of Cyber Dragons. And in this video, we are going to hear it from the man himself about whether or not Konami has an involvement in dictating which cards are used in a duel. He talks about Manjome's many decks and more. Was Manjome's growth as a person an armed dragon and its level up effect an intentional link? Hikokubo would say Manjome's deck continued to change. He starts with a Chthonian deck that includes cards like Chthonian Soldier, then he switched to a V through Z deck, then made a deck from discarded cards of the Northern Branch, and made an armed dragon deck. The primary reason we kept changing his deck was to accommodate his character growth, but there were also production side reasons for the anime. Duelists who were watching the show when it originally aired might have noticed. Didn't you notice that Manjome mostly used cards that already existed in the OCG? Weekly anime cannot be broadcast unless the production is able to stably release an episode per week. Production happens several months ahead of the broadcast, and several episodes will be produced in parallel. Due to the nature of this project, this would inevitably lead to a large amount of monsters being designed. It ultimately is something you can't avoid because of the nature of the project, but if we could reduce the stress on the production team even a smidgen, was our thought process. Personally, I try to make it possible to regularly use existing cards in duels, though there is still a hassle with adapting existing cards to the TV show. So very interesting note here, and again, these interviews, man, I'm telling you, it's the coolest thing we've gotten regarding the Yu-Gi-Oh! Anime in quite some time from a behind-the-scenes perspective, and I think it's the coolest thing the GX 20th anniversary has brought us. Hikokubo talks about how he wanted to use already existing cards to just lessen the burden on the production team, and he confirms what we already knew, that the production is supposed to be several months ahead of the broadcast. I think of shows like Arc 5 and Vrains, who had really troubling issues with production, where it seemed production wasn't even like a month ahead of the broadcast. It's why you were in recap hell with Vrains. It's why Arc 5 was talking about changing the Zark design like only a couple of weeks before the Zark episodes were airing. So yeah, it really does speak volumes about how important it is to be several months ahead of the actual broadcast in production. Hikokubo would go on to say, this time around with his Armed Dragon deck, yes, I was thinking, I wonder if Armed Dragon, which has its level up effect, could be linked to Manjome completing his warrior training in the wilderness at North School, which made him level up there. Personally, I was grateful there were cards that could manage to last a two-parter, though it required some trial and error. I think Manjome's style of using different cards one after another ended up being one of his key charms as a character. And I would agree, I think one of the more memorable things about Manjome is the diversity in decks, whether it's V through Z, whether it's Armed Dragon, whether it's Ojama. You know, in Yu-Gi-Oh! Anime, you so often only associate a character with one archetype. Manjome, and Shingo Sawatari for that matter in Arc 5, both stick out as duelists who used multiple decks. And I'm not talking about only like two different archetypes. I'm talking about multiple different archetypes throughout the series. It's something that is very rare throughout the 8 shows, and I think it's something that makes the characters very, very unique. Hikokubo also touches on why some monsters were summoned in face-up defense position and some weren't. Just like duel monsters, if you summoned a normal monster in defense, you could bring it out in face-up defense position. I may have been following the flow set by the original comics, but since it's an anime, the vibes are important. This is not an arbitrary decision, but one I made on a case-by-case basis with input from the producers. However, when using OCG cards, if you would normal summon a monster with a flip effect, we would always normal summon them in face-down defense position. In these episodes, Gravekeeper's Guard was one such case. On the other hand, it turns out that it's a monster with a flip effect. It's hard to explain. The specific of this sort of thing changes little by little, depending on the show, which is something you can only really see in long-running series. A lot of people would always question why in early Yu-Gi-Oh! If a duelist summoned a monster in face-down defense position, sometimes that monster would be summoned face-up, which obviously is an illegal move in the actual card game. And I think Hikokubo says it here, right? Vibes are important. If that monster's not going to have a flip effect, being able to show the monster, being able to give the audience an idea of how much defense points it has, what monster it is, just to have another presence on the field, I think is pretty important. And obviously, every time a monster was put in defense position, Masahiro Hikokubo made the decision whether or not to have those monsters face up or face down, which is certainly really interesting. And now, what a lot of people have wondered, how much involvement does Konami have in dictating which cards are used in the anime? And we actually got an answer to this question, and this is a question a lot of us have speculated on for decades. Around the time the show was airing, were there any requests from the OCG side of things, like, we want you to include this card? Hikokubo responds, I wasn't in direct communication with Konami during the days of GX, but I think there was some nuanced discussion with the producers asking to use certain cards, if at all possible. As a side note, in the case of most hobby anime, the timing of on-air appearance and the new product launches are perfectly aligned. A new item appears in commercial before it shows up in the show. However, at that time, there was a delay between the production of the cards for the OCG and the production of the TV show, and things like that never worked out. Sometimes, however, the release date of certain cards would match their on-air appearance in the TV show. In those cases, we got information about the cards before they were released, and we used that information in the TV show. I do apologize, as it's been some time, so I've forgotten the specifics, so please enjoy watching it and imagine maybe this was the case. But there were cases where I did take a card and build a theme around them. Two such examples were Red Eye's Darkness Dragon from episode 30 and Vampire Genesis from episode 31. Both were cards included in structure decks, and the staff and I picked them because they were very easy for viewers to get, they had very appealing effects, and they were just strong enough to work as the ace cards for villains in the show. We chose cards that we thought would please the audience, as we felt it was nice to see the cards you actually own play a part in the TV show. So this is really interesting, and I have some thoughts here. My first big thought is, I think it's interesting he says, I wasn't in direct communication with Konami during GX, almost implying like that changed as the Yu-Gi-Oh! Shows go on. I think about Yuri abandoning his Predaplants to use the Ancient Gear structure deck in Yu-Gi-Oh! Arc 5 against Asuka right when that deck came out. That to me is like the most obvious example of Konami getting involved and requiring or recommending a structure deck being used. But I also like here how Hikokubo would make his own judgment and say, all right, these are structure decks coming out in the card game. Let's take a card from the structure deck and then build decks around those cards, which he did with Red Eyes and Vampires in episodes 30 and 31, respectively. So I really, really like that. Konami, maybe during GX, were not as involved as requiring cards to be used as they may have been in the more recent shows, but it's really cool that we actually got an official answer to this, as this is something that a lot of people have wondered about for a very, very long time. Hikokubo is also asked, can you tell us exactly how the job of duel composition works? Hikokubo writes, many of you seem interested in my job, so I'm trying to think of how to articulate what kind of job it is. First off, it focuses on matchmaking of who will fight based on the series composition and structure. There is a wide range of things to think about, such as the deck image of each character, and key cards for the entire show, such as the Sacred Beasts. It's also important to propose the images for card illustrations, give lectures on dueling to the screenwriters, check the completed script, and explain how to understand a duel. But what I suspect you're all interested in and really asking is, how was the duel for each episode structured? And Hikokubo says, for each episode's duel, I made a duel chart, which basically worked like a Shogai Kifu, which apparently is just written or digital notations of a game's moves, which makes sense in this case. It's a document that would follow the flow of a duel, keeping track of life point math and the size of each duel's hand, as well as which cards were played and activated, and served as the basis for how duels were depicted in the TV show. But more than anything, I felt the main purpose of the duel flowchart was to help tell the scriptwriter what the duel was about. So really, really cool behind the scenes stuff here. I think I've always personally wondered, what does a duel writer do? Like, how do they show off and how do they keep track of each duel as they're writing it so that that duel can get animated and the voice actors know what to say and do? And it's really, really cool to see a little script here, or a duel chart of what these Yu-Gi-Oh anime duels look like before they are brought to life. Hikokubo would also say something really interesting regarding episode 32, which was a duel that Kaiser lost. A duel in which Kaiser lost. I was worried how to sell the loss of the story's strongest and best duelist. If you play a card so powerful, it seems like a complete fraud. It raises viewer expectations that Kaiser will be able to do something about it. If we let a duelist lose, it loses the standing of the duelist, so we needed a variety of ideas to prevent that feeling from happening, and we came up with various ideas and scenarios that would happen outside the duel. Obviously, that includes his younger brother being held hostage by Camula, which caused Kaiser to basically put the duel disc down and lose. I kind of equate it to like in WWE or pro wrestling, where a wrestler is protected in a loss. They lose a wrestling match not in a clean way, but because the opponent cheated or some outside interference happened, and that's how you can keep a wrestler still feeling legit to the audience, even in a loss. And I feel like that's kind of what Hikokubo is talking about here when discussing the challenges to having the best and strongest duelist in the show at that time lose a duel. He goes on to say, duel composition would often take a month to complete per episodes, since any mistakes would have to be corrected. Sometimes episodes would have 10 plus versions due to necessary changes and the corrections of various mistakes. However, I was often doing this in parallel. I might also want to know exactly how long it took for record keeping purposes. Ha ha ha. So it's crazy to think that all the duels we've seen throughout the 8 Yu-Gi-Oh shows, some of them may have been changed 10 plus times in order to get the duel right. Now, I imagine a lot of these changes are not necessarily major changes, but it is insane to think that a duel we love, let's take Shun and Sora in Arc 5, for example. I've talked about Arc 5 a lot in this video. Shun and Sora in Arc 5, maybe that duel had like 6 different versions, and I'm happy they ended up going with the version that we ended up seeing. And then maybe duels that were a little bit on the underwhelming side had some versions that were cool, and then changes were made for whatever reasons. It's really interesting to think about, and just again, I want you guys to realize how many scrapped ideas, monsters, duel sequences probably took place throughout all of these shows. And man, these sorts of interviews are just floodgates and data mines for all of this information. The final thing I want to touch on real quick, why were the Ojamas chosen as Manjome spirits? And Hikokubo says, I think it was because of Shin Yoshida-san, one of the scriptwriters. He liked the idea and went with that direction. So for those wondering who gets the credit for having these 3 ugly freaks as Manjome's spirit monsters, you can give the credit to Shin Yoshida. Ladies and gentlemen, these interviews have been a lot of fun to discuss with you guys and go over. I will have all of them linked down below if you are interested, and check out the last 2 videos I did, Fire Dragon and more of Hikokubo's interviews, if you like behind the scenes stuff like this. And if we get more interviews in the future, which hopefully we will, as the GX remaster flows on here, I will certainly be covering them. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll talk to you in the comments below, and I hope you have an amazing day. Take care, guys.